Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Late Night Yap. Today's episode, we have another spooky, scary episode, and this week I decided to do Sally's makeup from The Nightmare Before Christmas. Now, I don't think I did too bad. I don't think I did too bad now. It looks pretty good for the most part. I'm not a professional or anything, but it'll do for our scary story month of October. And I did find some pretty creepy stories to read this week, so let's go ahead and get into our stories. This took place about 7 or 8 years ago when I was in middle school. As usual, I was up late one night. My family lived in an apartment. I shared a room with my dad. My parents are divorced. Sometimes I'd sleep in the living room on the sofa so that I wouldn't disturb him. I was curled up facing the back of the sofa with the TV turned off. It's pitch black. There are no lights on. Suddenly, I hear noise coming from the TV. I looked toward it to see that the DVD player had randomly turned itself on and opened up. I thought maybe I'd laid down on the remote. No, it's on the table. I grabbed the remote, closed the DVD player, turned it off, and placed the remote back onto the coffee table. Nothing too creepy, right? But I was a middle schooler, and even after convincing myself it was some sort of technical malfunction, I was still a little jumpy. So I crawled back up, this time facing the TV, which is right next to the front door. Not even 5 minutes later, the front door, which we'd forgotten to lock, started opening. Only opened enough for me to see a hand on the external doorknob. I sat up, frozen with fear. Then the door closed. I waited and then ran to lock it. It was probably a coincidence of a technical malfunction and a drunk guy opening the wrong door, but I did not sleep well for the next 5 nights. When I was 9, my parents split up, and my dad rented a house in a pretty isolated part of town. Surrounded by woods, I couldn't see any neighbors. It wasn't a nice area, especially for kids. An old friend of his lived in the basement apartment. He was kind of a weird guy, super neckbeard, into mystic stuff, and hit on my mom constantly when she and my dad were still together. Upstairs, my dad lived with Big Frank, a big teddy bear Viking guy who loved me and my little brother 5 at the time, and Barney, a very religious stagehand who also liked my brother and me a lot. For a while, when me and my brother and I came to visit my dad, everything was cool. We'd run around in the woods, play games, stay up late, eating junk food. Slowly, I started to feel more and more creeped out whenever we were there. I'd run to my bed after turning the lights out because every child knows the bed is the only place you're safe. I constantly felt like something was there. One day, my brother told me his closet door opened in the middle of the night. We didn't tell Dad, probably because he wasn't very good at listening to us back then, and we knew that he wouldn't take us seriously. Instead, we told Barney. Barney said that he felt something evil in the house, and he'd do something about it. When everyone else left the house, Barney sprinkled some holy water around, lit candles, and said a few prayers. The house felt much less scary when we got back that evening, but it went right back to being creepy and awful by the next weekend. Until Dad moved out 5 years later, we just put up with it and pretended not to be scared. It's easy enough to put up with something creepy for a couple days at a time, but not as long as nothing actually happens. A couple summers ago, I moved in with Dad and stepmom. He got married a year after moving out of the house. While going to school on a beautiful evening, we were sitting around playing a game, a few alcoholic beverages, when my stepmom brought up that house and how filthy it was because a bunch of bachelors lived there. We all laughed to talk about the old roommates and wacky things that happened while we all lived there. Then I said, Bro and I were sure the place was haunted or something. He says his closet door opened in the middle of the night. I never saw anything weird, but that place was creepy. My dad nodded and said, Yeah, there was some kind of evil presence there. I never told you kids this, but I was pushed down the stairs a few times while going to the basement for laundry. And there was this one time I went to the kitchen and all of our knives were stuck in the ceiling. And you didn't tell nobody? Oh my gosh. That is crazy, Dad. Why did you not say anything? Like, yeah, I'm just gonna bring my kids over casually with knives that are being stuck into the freaking ceiling. Like, come on now, dude. Like, what? When I was a kid, 4 to 6 range, my mother had this boyfriend. Let's call him Frank. For the most part, he was an okay guy, but he had some serious mental issues, which we found out later. At some point, they decided to move to Albuquerque, which we were in California then, and off we went. Things were okay for a bit, but Frank drank more and more and was growing more and more paranoid each day. Eventually, my mother found out that he bought plane tickets, one for himself and a child, me, out of the country. She freaked out and they got into a bit of an argument that ended up with the cops arresting him because of attempted kidnapping. She said that he would be in holding for about 4 days, long enough to pack up and leave, but that night the cops decided to let him out. Why? Because he knew how to throw up red substance and they freaked out. The cops were not the brightest. And instead of taking him to the hospital, they dropped him off at Walgreens to get his medication since this guy clearly was no threat. To make things worse, they didn't even bother calling to warn, oh, hey, the guy that was planning on kidnapping your child is roaming the streets. A few hours later, I'm asleep in a sleeping bag next to her when I wake up to find his shadowy figure standing over me. He broke in. I scream, she jumps up, literally throws him from the room, slams the door, and screams for me to lock it. I do. I think, anyway, never really came up. They start screaming at each other. The neighbors have already called the cops at this point because hey, there was some creeps sneaking around the place. At some point during their fighting, she threw him from the sliding glass door. About the same time, two officers were sneaking around the house to see what was going on. She was arrested and he kept trying to tell them to let me stay with him. I was still locked in the bedroom. Eventually, the cops convinced me to unlock the door. While he is screaming that I would be fine, and they find all of the evidence of him planning on unaliving her and taking me to Sweden where he was born and had dual nationality so he could somehow keep me away from my grandparents and father. I spent a few days in a CPS house while they sorted her information. It was a weekend which added time, and as soon as she was out, we were gone. He kept calling my grandparents' house to tell her he was sorry and he would be there soon to make things better. I don't like why is he not arrested? How is he still calling the grandparents? And why is he not arrested? That's awful. My school's library is open until around 2 in the morning for idiots like me who don't do their essays until the last minute. It's a pretty small building, and most of the books are in the basement area called the stacks. Just to give a quick layout, there's a big main stairs down to the stacks, a vending machine room, and a long hallway with 4 entrances into the stacks. The stacks are two really big rooms on opposite sides of the hallway with a huge amount of bookshelves and study desks lining the wall. This was around 11 p.m. last year. It was pretty research-intensive essays, so I was down in the stacks working in one of the study desks so I didn't have to keep going upstairs and downstairs. I had been there for maybe 2 hours, and everyone except for a boy working a few desks down from me had already left. I was pretty zoned out at this point. It was an 8 a.m. class, so I didn't have much time left until it was due and sort of panicking. So it really pissed me off when I heard someone flipping through book pages so fast to make them do that loud noise at the end of the other room. I sort of ignored it for a while, thinking they'd go away eventually, but they just kept doing it. After about 5 minutes, I got sick of it and started to walk over to tell them to knock it off. I get about 3 steps across the room and it just stopped. I sat back down and it was only quiet again for like 10 more minutes before the flipping of pages started again, only loads louder, like they grab a huge book that time. The boy started to get pissed off too, and he stood up and started walking through the bookshelves trying to find them. It keeps going, so I got up too and started looking around with him. It got really loud and it was pretty obvious where it was coming from by that point, so we started walking towards it. He was on one side of the shelves and I was on the other. We walked all the way down the shelves, no one was there. We hadn't seen anyone come in, and we were on the side of the room of the entrances. No way anyone could have come in without us seeing them. The noise stopped again, and we both sort of slowly walked back to our seats. I assumed it's just a fan or something in the room, and I really needed to get my essay done. We sat down, and immediately the noise started again. It sounded like it was coming from right next to the guy's chair. He shoved his stuff in his bag and looked at me and said, "F this," and took off. I was out of there maybe 5 seconds behind him. I still won't go back in there at night, even if there's other people down there. No essay is worth getting unalived by a weird book ghost. And then somebody commented and said the Stacks is a pretty creepy name. I know, right? Like, what? I wonder what that was. I wonder if it really was like it was a library ghost. The book ghosty. Before I get to the story with the suitcase, I have to preface a little bit. Many years ago, when I met my ex and her family in a mobile home, my ex and this younger sister, who is a bit messed up in and out of psych wards, my ex and her younger sister share a room in the mobile home. While we were dating and before my son was born, she told me a story about her younger sister would wake up and talk to the man in the hallway. The man always has a suitcase and wore a brimmed hat. My ex and her family always dismissed them as younger sister was a bit nuts. Flash forward a few years, my ex and I have a son together. Her parents moved out of the mobile home and into a house, and we were renting the mobile home to my ex. Our son's room was the exact same room my ex and her sister slept in. One night after our son had gone to bed and was asleep for a long while, I checked on him. We heard him get out of bed. We figured he would come to the room and start asking to use the potty, but instead started talking to someone. He said, "Hi," and started talking about his favorite stuffed animal. At the time, it was a ducky. Curious, I called back and asked who he was talking to. He pops his head out of the room and informs me he's talking to the man with a suitcase and wearing a hat. At the time, he was 2.5 and had never heard about his aunt seeing the same guy. About 5 years ago, some friends and I went camping in Oconee State Park in South Carolina. We were in high school and went with our school ROTC instructor. This guy was in his 50s, but still an ox. He was a sergeant major while in the army and was the definition of a badass. So the first night camping was really cold and we decided to sleep around the fire. We all woke up about the same time in the middle of the night to the smell of wet dog and rotting flesh. We decided it might be damp leaves, so we slept through the rest of the night. Well, we wake up the next morning and there were paw prints all over the place. And I'm not talking about the outskirts of the site, I mean there were paw prints 4 feet away from where I laid my head that night. We were all pretty creeped out, so we decided to head to town to get some lunch. We stayed in town the rest of the day and headed back to the site around dusk. My friend and I are in the back of the truck as we drive down the gravel road to the site, and all of a sudden, Sergeant Major slammed on the brakes and we came to a stop in the middle of the road. We all jumped up and looked over the cab to see what it was. Standing in the middle of the road was a hairless animal, around 50 pounds, standing on its hind legs. While still on its back legs, it walked to the side of the road and let out this god-awful screeching noise. It darted in the woods and left us all frozen in fear. Then we smell it. The same terrible smell from the night before. We got in the cab and saw Sergeant Major like I had never seen him. I was absolutely terrified. The animal creature we saw shook him to his core. We drove in silence the rest of the ride back to the site. And when we got there, he told us that we were leaving and packing everything up. None of us have been back since then, and Sergeant Major won't let any ROTC camp there anymore. We agreed what we saw looked like a mix between a bobcat and a coyote, but walked like a bear on its back legs. We named it the Coyote. A few of my friends who hadn't heard the story decided to go up there one day and said the entire area gave off a really creepy vibe and decided to leave. After I told them the story, it sealed the deal that none of us will be going back. I wonder if they saw like a werewolf. I think it was probably a werewolf that they saw. Which there are stories that I've heard in like I think from like the Appalachian Mountains. I don't know how to say it right. But you know what I'm talking about? Like people seeing like werewolves and it like being like a real thing, like people seeing them. One of my mom's friends bought an old farmhouse a year back. They have a 3-year-old son. The kid had an imaginary friend named Kevin. He would play with his toys in his room and talk to Kevin. His parents didn't really think anything of it considering the age of the kid. It got weird after they started listening to their son's conversations with Kevin over the baby monitor. It seemed like something a 3-year-old wouldn't regularly talk about. The kid was kind of goofy and so they didn't think much of it. Then they asked the kid about Kevin. He said Kevin is nice, he's a farmer. They figured it was because this kid loved to play with toy tractors and they had just moved to a farmhouse, but then shit got real. There was a shelf mounted on the wall of the kids' room that was about 5 feet off the floor, opposite of the bed. One morning, the parents go to the kids' room to find one of the stuffed animals that was on the shelf on the kid's bed. They asked him how he got the rabbit, and he said that Kevin got it for him. A few months passed, and shit like this happens every now and again. Nothing that could reasonably be explained since they moved in. They had found a church in the area and got involved in Bible study with a few other couples from the church. They decided they would host Bible study one day, and when they were setting everything up, they gave their address to one of the couples that lived in town for a while. When they gave the address to the older couple, the wife looked at it and said to her husband, "Hey, isn't this Kevin's old place?" Apparently, a man named Kevin used to live there. He ran into some financial troubles, sold most of the land to the neighboring farm, but kept the small patch of land that the house was on. He suffered from depression and had a lot of adult beverage problems, and eventually unalived himself in the house. Their friend from church knew Kevin, and it was a small town in Iowa, and everyone knows everyone. He found a picture of Kevin and gave it to my mom's friend. The picture was of Kevin and our three other guys that Kevin would meet and have coffee with and talk about farming. They showed the picture to the kid, and the kid pointed at Kevin and said, "Hey, look, it's Kevin." They moved. I mean, I don't really know if Kevin was bad necessarily. Sometimes when spirits they pass away, sometimes they don't really understand that they passed away, so they're still lingering. But after a while, I think they kind of like realize, but when they're disturbed or abruptly pass away, they linger, you know. I don't necessarily think Kevin was a bad figure there. But I don't really blame them for moving though. But just remember that if you do move and something like this happens to you, like a house haunting, moving doesn't always solve the issue. Sometimes it moves with you. So there's also that. When I was in college, it was the height of all the ghost hunting shows. I was really interested in possibly all of it since I was a kid. I didn't know if I believed in it or not. I just liked the idea of investigating it all, so I started doing research. I read books, watched documentaries, and studied different techniques. The more and more I learned, the more I realized that going into a situation looking for ghosts or spirits would completely ruin an investigation. What tends to happen with this mentality is that your brain starts finding things that aren't there. So I started trying to train myself to go into situations with a skeptic mindset. Instead of looking for the paranormal, it's better to look for normal explanations for the abnormal. While doing this, I met people from all walks of life who adopted this method. We eventually made a club in our university that's actually become the most active and sought after club to be a part of. We were invited to houses, businesses, and historic parts, Gettysburg namely, to see what explanations and evidence we could find. We would hand pick teams for special investigations if we considered them serious. We did this because the club was an open enrollment, and while we would take days to have a refresher course of do's and don'ts during investigations, there would still be people looking to find ghosts. Anyway, out of all the investigations we did, we had three places that we went to which we could not explain what we'd captured on video and sound. One was a theater in our home city. The entire night we caught nothing and it was a bust. Even going through evidence, which we would do 3 times, provided almost nothing until a co investigator's mother walked through the room where we were watching a tape of the entire theater and said, "Who the heck is up there?" We made her show us. In the balcony seats, which were locked at night and were not allowed up there because of the antiques in it, there was a lamp lit behind a window curtain. You could see a figure move in front of the light of the lamp and almost block it, similarly as if you were to put a white sheet in front of a light and then deaden it in the intensity of it. And then you could see something pull back the curtain a little bit as if it were peeking out. It lasted about 15 seconds. We checked our record of where each of the group was at the time and asked each person if they'd been in the balcony, and all responded no. We then asked our guide, who would unlock and lock the sections we were investigating, to which she responded that she did not have a key to the balcony because what was inside of them. Regardless, she was with my group at the time the event and every other person in the investigation was accounted for because we were able to match up timestamps from their recordings. 2. Gettysburg. There was 3 instances at Gettysburg that were unexplainable. This evidence has been lost because we did this investigation close to 7 years ago when we were less organized. The first was a picture, the best one I'd seen. There were actually 3 pictures that ran together, the first 2 being fog that seemed to have a blue hue to it, and the last one sending chills down my spine because it was clear as day, a man laying on a rock at Devil's Den looking at Little Round Top from the bottom, dressed in full Confederate garb. When first looking at it, it looks like pictures were distorted until you realize you can make out the whiskers on his beard and gold patches on his hat from arms to his coat. The second, which I was not there for, was supposedly a piece of paper that was on a rock in the woods that said, "What's your name?" They walked back about 40 feet or so to record and watched for 30 minutes to make sure it wasn't tampered with. When they went back, there were clear scribbles on the paper, but they weren't anything legible. The third and final Gettysburg story is when I was walking through an area between the Wheatfield Cemetery Ridge. I was there with three others, and we had about 10 feet between us, and we walked in line. This is all on digital recording. You could hear something hit me in the back, like something threw a rock or something. I stop and say, "Ouch, Joe, what the heck, dude?" To which he said he did nothing. At the time of this, we all stopped through the recording, and you can hear us go silent in the distance and hear a drum play a few beats. We did not hear this at the time we were supposed to until we listened to the recording later, but Joe mentioned previously it's a drummer and went white when we heard it was a drummer and went white when he heard it. He listened a few times before telling us that it was a halt from a drum line. The third one is very lengthy, and I guess I'll write it here. The third one is very lengthy, and I guess I'll write it here if there's any interest. I don't currently do these investigations anymore. I'll be the first one in the room to be a skeptic with any paranormal claim, but there were a few times that I was stumped. I'm not saying I know ghosts exist or not, I don't have an answer. I can, however, say that there are things in this world we don't understand. Throughout the years we did the club, the university, we became highly recognized, had been given awards from the school and what we have done in our investigation tactics and also community charity work. Doing investigations was absolutely not what you see on TV. They are much more boring and you seldom have anything happen, but it's a labor of love. It's hard to explain it because when you find a piece of footage you can't explain, you want more. I know I get backlash from these claims. I always do when I post my experiences, but I promise on my parents' lives that I say what did indeed happen. I have not tried to emphasize any of it and I have told the stories as they happened. And here it doesn't look like OP updated with the third story, so we do not have the third lengthy one, but that was pretty good. That was a pretty good story with like the investigation and stuff like that, you know. I know a lot of times like people on TV, you see them do these investigations, and sometimes I do believe that they have somebody that's like making things happen so that they have something like on TV. But most of the time, those things don't always happen, and it sometimes it could take the investigators quite a while before they actually get something. But when you do, you're kind of just like, oh, you're like, wow, I didn't know. Okay. When you get something unexplained, it's just like, what? But that is going to be the end of But that is going to be the end of our spooky story time. If you like today's episode, please make sure that you give me a like and subscribe. And if you want, leave a comment down below of any of your scary stories so that we can read them on the podcast this month. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.